Okay, it looks like actually everybody's in and everybody's connected. So welcome to our LLM career week. We made it a little more than a week this time because we learned that squeezing everything into a week is too much. But the last session of our LLM career programming affiliated with ISIP, the International Student Interview Program. For those of you who have not seen me on the prior programs, I'm Clara Solomon, Director of Counseling and Career Development at NYU Law, and overseeing ISIP. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Michael Wilds. I think, Michael Wilds' firm, Wilds and Weinberg, and his father, Leon, started presenting at this program 36 years ago when we started ISIP. And we're delighted that they have been, Michael and Leon have been part of this program for so long. Michael is the managing partner of Wilds and Weinberg PC. He's also an adjunct professor at Cardozo School of Law in New York, where he teaches business immigration law and externship as a part of its field clinic faculty. Michael's a former federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, and he's author of Safe Haven in America, Battles to Open the Golden Door. Having represented the United States government in immigration proceedings, Michael Wilds is a frequent participant on professional panels and a commentator on network television. He's also testified on Capitol Hill in connection with anti-terrorism legislation. His firm specializes exclusively in the practice of U.S. immigration and nationality law. And I mentioned Leon Wilds, his father. Leon established the firm in 1960. And his best known accomplishment was his successful representation of John Lennon in his widely publicized deportation proceedings. And I think Leon is also here virtually listening in with us. So we're delighted to have both.
He's in Florida, listening in on the side. Dad's 88 years young, still practicing because he never perfected being a lawyer. You practiced law. And he's an alma mater of NYU Law School. He went to NYU Law School back in the day also.
That's great. So we are going to go, Michael's going to give a brief presentation, some overview. What we're talking about today is what you as future lawyers or future US lawyers should be thinking about as you prepare for the next steps post-graduation. We can answer a little bit and we'll talk a little bit about student visa concerns now that you are getting into your second semester of your LLM program. You'll want to be thinking about optional practical training, OPT, making sure you're connecting to your school about your OPT options and the deadlines to file for that. But actually, Michael's here to talk about what happens after that, because OPT is only 12 months. And if you're hoping to stay here longer, you're going to need to have a strategy for your immigration. And we will have a Q&A session. So please use the Q&A feature, not the chat. Please use the Q&A feature. I will monitor that. And then we'll be asking Michael those questions throughout this session or as appropriate. I did see a question from a student asking if this is being recorded. Yes, it is. And check in with your school's ISIP coordinator sometime. Probably by the end of this week, we'll have all of the recordings available. So if you have to leave because of class, we completely understand and we will share this. There's also a document that the Wilds and Weinberg firm put together with some information about visa categories. That's available through a Google Drive link that I just put online in the chat for everybody. So with that housekeeping out of the way, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us an overview.
Thank you, Clara. And I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here. We had the beautiful chamber that we used to go year after year. And I bring greetings, like I said, from my father, my mentor. I wanted to carry his briefcase, and I'm carrying the ball right now. And we're all here. I see there are about 84 participants. And I can just imagine being in a room, and I'll ask all of you to reach out to me. I'll put my email in there if you don't mind, Clara, in case there are questions that come up. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I'm going to go over some just general speak and then give you some kind of broad top talking points, and then I'm happy to entertain questions as they come up. May I share the screen now?
Yes, go ahead. You should have.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to get into my emails on my calendar. Forgive me. And here we go. So Um, is it clear there? Okay, cool. We'll start from the beginning. So U.S. immigration and nationality, anybody who's interested in the field should come and reach out to me. I teach this in a law school myself, and we're really honored to have the trust of the NYU system and all the LLMs that are out there. So what is immigration law in a nutshell? It's the journey from getting a visitor's visa all the way to U.S. citizenship. There are generally two statuses that a person can have, a non-immigrant or an immigrant, and there are three ways of getting a status, and that is either based on employment, based on a relationship, or ultimately based on an investment that could be made. There's a presumption in the law that everybody who comes to America wants to live here, and the presumption is negated by an H1B or an L visa. Otherwise, the burden is on you to prove that you're going to leave. You can change your status or you can adjust your status in the United States. It's like one big game of tag. You have to make sure that you go from one temporary status to another. That's when you change, or you adjust when you go from a temporary status to get a green card if you were to marry or otherwise. F1 full-time students, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You're all matriculated properly. You have to show that you have a home abroad, that you have no intention in giving up. You have the I-20 with the DS, the duration of status, and you're all experts now in the grace periods and all of that. To maintain your status, you have to make sure that you have your I-20 with you at all times, that your student affairs office is updating enrollments, and that you're not violating your status. And we'll make this PowerPoint available also, Clara, for anybody that wants it, just to double check. Traveling comes with all kinds of details, but I'm going to jump to the requirements of getting yourself in order right now. And that is the journey of coming to the United States. And that is something that starts with the H1B visa. What is the H1B visa? It's a professional work visa if you have a pulse and a degree. Now, everybody here is an LLM, which means you've already done law school in your home country, and you've already gone to college before you went to law school. So when you have a bachelor's degree, you are in a position to do an H1B. How many people, I can't see you, but how many out of the 80 plus people have applied for an H1 in the last year, 2 years? Probably nobody. You're probably waking up to this new journey now. For those of you that are watching this recording, please be in touch with myself or a capable immigration lawyer. You're allowed to apply for an H1B visa right away. And you have to understand that that visa is the hallmark of lawyers, but I'm going to take you through a little journey of some of the main visas. First is the B1, B2. What is the B1, B2? That's visitors for business and for pleasure. For your purposes, and I teach a business immigration law class at Cardozo Law School, this is the pivot visa. A person who is on a B1, B2 visa is actually here for business if they're on a foreign payroll, or they're here for pleasure on a B2. The B1 and B2 is not something you're allowed to work on. The law is very simple, and it was my father who was the lawyer of record with a case called the Matter of HERA that stands for the proposition of what's the difference between business and employment. But if you're running out of runway, the go-to visa might be to pivot to one of these so you maintain your status at all times. This is not to be confused with the visa waiver program. The visa waiver program is for about 37 countries where we have the right for those individuals to come into the United States up to 90 days. Here, you can't change your status from one to the other. With the B1, B2, you can fall out of step with your F1, become a B1, B2, and then go back to another status if you need to. These are the visa waiver countries. It's in the PowerPoint. The H1B visa is the proper visa for professionals with a bachelor's degree or higher. All of you have gone to law school. You have an LLM degree from the United States. It's a wonderful visa. It's basically a visa that allows you to stay up to 6 years. You can extend beyond 6 years, believe it or not. If by year 5, your green card case is cooking for a full year, you can extend your H1. We have clients with 12 years, 15 years in H1, particularly Chinese and Indian nationals where the quotas are backed up. You can get extensions of these green cards until your of the H1 until your green card is approved. There's an annual cap of 65,000 of these H1s. In addition to the 65,000 H1s, there's an additional 20,000 for people who have master's H1Bs who are studying in US master's schools. So NYU would qualify. All the American schools that you're studying in would qualify. So all 80 plus of you would be able to apply for the two lotteries, the 65,000 and the 20,000. And there is a set aside for Chile or Singapore, if there are any nationals that are on here. There are certain employers that are exempt from this cap, and that is institutions of higher learning, nonprofits affiliated with higher education, and government research or organizations. There are about 200,000-300,000 people that apply for H1s. But guess what? Last year, the cap really never closed because of a lot of the people during the pandemic changed their minds, both employers and individuals. So they kept putting out more records saying we're willing to open it up, and they put more people into the queue. The beautiful thing about the H1 is there's a portability clause that enables you to go from one employer to the next. So you can have one approved and then pivot to somebody else. You can have multiples of the same visa. You can have full-time and part-time and part-time and part-time, or two full-time jobs. And we counsel clients all the time. Once you're terminated, God forbid, there is a 60-day grace period that applies. And of course, you can change status to the B2 and all of that. An employer is responsible for a return transportation to your home country. So that's the H1B visa, classic visa for anybody with a bachelor's degree and a pulse. You could have, you should have done it in the past and bank it. It's good for 6 years. You could always come back to it. Other visas for Canadians and Mexicans, there are trade NAFTA visas. For Australians, there's the E3. For those of you that have worked in law firms abroad that have offices in the United States, you can do the L1. For those of you that are legends or extraordinary non-citizens in your field, you can actually get an O1 visa as well. And these O1 visas I have workshops for. You really have to show distinction. You can't be a legend in your own mind. You have to have talent. And there are a lot of issues. They're supporting people that can come in particular areas. And there are visas for dependents in all of these visas as well. The J1 doesn't really work for this crowd because you're all here with F1s and you've all had OPT and so forth. All I can say is you don't want to violate your status. Once you get your H1, if you get the H1, that visa allows for dual intent. You can apply for a family preference. If you marry somebody, you can have your sponsoring employer petition for you. You can make a major investment in US commercial enterprise through the EB-5 program and buy a green card. Although the law has lapsed, there is one part of that that's still alive. Or you can go on conventionally through asylum, if God forbid you marry somebody who's abusive, or if you do the diversity lottery program. There are a lot of other ways to get green cards. Our president in the past have put all kinds of bans, and last year was very tumultuous to students that were trying to get green cards through law schools and getting practical training and so forth. But the critical idea is to find a sponsor and not waste valuable time. A lot of sponsors do not like to sponsor people for green cards or for H1s, and whether or not you have to stay with the employer and for how long is a function of the counsel that we give to our employer, to our clients. Once you get a green card, applying for citizenship is the golden grail. All I can say to you is that all we practice is US immigration law. We're located in New York, New Jersey, Miami, and LA. That's my father over here, guys. He was John Lennon's lawyer back in the day, as Clara indicated. And we have a real storied practice. I represented Mrs. Trump and Pele. I'm a proud Democrat. I'm a mayor of a small city in New Jersey, you should know. And despite the relationships that we have, we are very strong advocates for students, making sure, of course, that you continue to engage yourself in this golden experiment that we call America. I wrote a book, as Clara said, called Safe Haven in America, Battles to Open the Golden Door. That golden door is on a hinge open to foreign students who will reinvent themselves and with their entrepreneurial spirit serve the nobility that our profession has laid out. I urge you to reach out to us if we can be of help, and I'm happy to entertain as many questions as people can stay. We have 92 participants now.
That's great. Yeah, so we sped through that. Thank you so much, Michael, for that. Because we wanted to make sure that we are able to address your direct questions. And we know some of you have, we're not going to do, Michael's not going to give individual immigration advising right now. But we do, I know that having done this for many years, and Michael even, and his firm even more than me, that often these questions come up again and again and again. And many of you, if one person in this group has a question, probably 15 people in this group have the same question. So I'm looking at the chat here, and I'm gonna, Michael, go through some of these.
Well,
Um,
before you go through them, let me just add some tidbits fresh off the press if I can.
yeah,
First, everybody here is a professional and a lawyer and knows that we went through hell with the last president. I just want everybody to understand that the denial rates and the challenges that people get on RFEs, requests for further evidence, and H1s have dropped to pre-Trump lows, which is always a good headline to start a lecture off with. Despite my relationship with his lovely wife, I pushed back hard on the president, and the system has kind of rebounded robustly when it comes to visas, and the government is cooperative. There are no denials nowadays on level one wages. There's less pushback on specialty occupations, the kind of challenges that you get on RFEs, requests for further evidence. The only thing noteworthy was that the EB-5 still is in limbo, but should be reinstated soon. And in terms of the H1B, so far this last year, there were 3 rounds of selection so far in the current year, and they still haven't announced that the cap was reached. The dates of entry this year as early as March 1 through 18. So right now it's January 31st. On March 1, employers can put your name into the system to see if you can get one of those coveted visas. And like the last 2 years, employers have to create a USCIS online account to electronically register and pay a $10 registration fee for each beneficiary. The registration for the multiple beneficiaries will be available. Employers who create this new account can then do so beginning February 21. The registration closes. USCIS will conduct a random lottery. As a reminder, again, 65,000 H1Bs for all applicants, with an additional 20,000 with master's level. USCIS received 308,000 H1B, initially selected 87,500 with registrations. Since not all registrants were approved, they weren't all selected, and they keep going back. It resulted in a total of 131,970 selections for 85,000 visas. Just an amazing experience. So I'm going to tell you something. Make sure you have a good lawyer, or if you're doing this, you shouldn't do this on your own. Find somebody capable. We're here for you, as we have always been for the generations that my dad started our practice. And I'll work with you guys on fees and come up with something special if you note that you came from this far.
that's great. Thank you. And I think that that information about the lottery and the timing is really important. Unfortunately, for those of you who are either F1 or J1, and a couple of students have put in that there are J1s on this call, so that's probably one of the first questions I'll get to. But for those of you who are F1 and J1, you do have the option to get work authorization after graduation through your student visa, whether that's the optional practical training for an F1 or your training option through the J1. And that will hopefully give you some room that maybe you can do the lottery twice. There might be some options.
That's great. That's, it's a runway. And if you have that 1 year OPT, you still want to apply for the H1. And if you get selected, don't use it, bank it, use your OPT, and then you'll activate it the next year. So now you have effectively 7 years to stay in America. And one fundamental governing rule, you can recapture every single day, week, and month that you were physically out of America on an H1B. So you're entitled to 6 years, 24/7 in America. So understand, you all have bachelor's degrees plus. You should, if you're watching this, and this is a student coming up through the ranks at a later time, consult an attorney to make sure you file a case.
Great. So since we're on that runway and that topic, and you did go through it pretty quickly, but a student is asking, when are the lotteries conducted? So I want to just kind of walk through that calendar again. So it's January. Some of the students on here may have just interviewed, and hopefully we'll have an offer in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and have a job. When should their employer be applying for an H1? When should they be talking to their employer about applying for an H1? And how does that time frame look?
So everybody is an immigration lawyer these days. In the old days, and I'm talking old days, you didn't have to worry about an H1 because they were never capped. You would have 1 year OPT and then you'd apply for an H. You would have 6 years on an H and then can apply for a green card at a later time. Now everybody becomes an expert on immigration. And the time to think about this really is in November and December. It's now January 31st. For this year, the H1B visa lottery will open up on March 1 and run through March 18. So, you need to have conversations, particularly in the bigger shops or the smaller shops for that matter, with employers that may not want to sponsor. The reason they love OPT is because they can pay you whatever they want. They can pay you minimum wage. To do an H1B requires an admonition with the Labor Department and with immigration that they're going to pay you either a full-time or a part-time wage, and that's governed by Labor Department rules. So there are a lot of employers that won't sponsor you, and you don't want to waste valuable time in a shop unless you think that they're going to do it. And it's a very hard experience and a harsh experience, but employers these days with the pandemic and everything are sometimes selective if they want to do it. Your job is to show the employer that you're worth an investing in. And the sooner you can convince them to do this, the sooner it is. Now, the rules are interesting. You can pay the legal fee to the lawyer. The filing fee has to come from the employer. You can negotiate with them and say, look, the prevailing wage is 90,000 or 80 something thousand for a lawyer. Pay me 50,000, and then you mark the hours that you're going to work. But don't let them pay you 50,000 and you're working full time. Make sure that you police this properly. And a lawyer charged in this arena has the obligation ethically to represent both the employer and the beneficiary. So you have to make sure there are no tricks. But some employers are going to want to know, why should I do this? They just like doing OPTs every year because they can pay them 15 or 20 bucks an hour, not 40 or $50 an hour. So you have to convince them that they ought to fall in love with you, not just heavy light, because our impression is that they're not going to do it in the smaller shops.
Great. So there are a couple of questions from J1 students who are asking, is the process the same? Are J1s also eligible to get work authorization and to apply for an H1B?
Sure.
Is there something different a J1 needs to think about, or what restrictions do they have to think about?
Happy to go through it. I just also want to add, employers who need to create a new account can do so beginning February 21. Once the registration period closes on the H1s, USAS will conduct that random lottery. So just keep in mind that the process begins mid-February and March, and then goes on, and they still haven't closed last year. So you really want to get your application in there. To answer your question on the J1, there are certain J1s that have 2-year foreign residence requirements that require somebody to touch back before they go from a J. Look in your passport. If it says that you're not subject to 212E, not subject to the 2-year foreign rule, you're okay. We've seen mistakes in the past that immigration has had where they marked it. They used to have these carbon documents where if they said not subject, but by the time the third copy got it, it was subject. So be very careful to have somebody double check. But if you don't have the 2-year foreign residence requirement, medical professionals and other people do, you're not prohibited from applying for the H1B. It's the same cycle and the same rules that apply. But you may want to consider leaving the J1 to go to an H. You may want to apply for the H, bank it, and still go and stay in your J, because your spouse can work on a J2. but not on an H4. The dependent for an H1 spouse isn't allowed to do it. So for those of you that are not so portable because you're married, you may want to do some thought whether or not there are other visa categories for you to apply for. Investor visas if you're starting your own law firm or working for a firm that's owned by foreign nationals. There are other visas like the EU2 visa that you can pivot to. That's why a consultation with a capable lawyer may be thoughtful too.
Great. Is sponsorship by a U.S. employer a requirement in order to apply for H1 visa?
Yes. You can be, you may not be admitted as a lawyer. You can still, because you have a pulse and a bachelor's degree, plus the law degree, plus the LLM, do an H1 as a foreign law consultant, as a law clerk. You can find a different title other than a lawyer and do an H1B. But it's important for you to note, it must be an American company that petitions for you.
Okay, that's actually a perfect segue, because another question that came in is, other than law firms, what other types of companies can a lawyer get an H1B?
Anything with a pulse. How do you like that? If you are, if you have a company that has restaurants, and they want you to be of counsel to that restaurant group, you can be sponsored. I had a physician once who we did an H1B as a calorie counter in a restaurant group. She was a medical doctor. She was using her science and her medical information to give professional advice to that group. If you have a degree in botany, you can work for a hedge fund dealing with biochemistry and bio stocks and so forth. So a lawyer, now, if you have a small coffee shop, you're not going to be sponsored as a lawyer for the coffee shop. But if there's an international business, if there's a business that has contracts and legal issues, now's the time to be imaginative. It's not unlike if a person has 50, 60 employees, for them to have somebody acting as a general counsel to that group. Think about all the requirements and the intersections that businesses have between contracts and labor issues and administrative concerns and so forth. This is where part of our responsibility as lawyers, when I consult with my clients, as that TV commercial says, what's in your wallet? Let's see what connections you have into industry, who loves you, not likes you, that's willing to sponsor you and legitimately employ you until you can find someplace else, and then use the portability clause to go someplace. Also, mind you, you can have multiple people put in for the lottery. You can only go home with one person to the dance. You can only do one H1B, but you can put in several people attempting to do the lottery. That's another way of hedging your bets, if it were. So if you were offered a job from a law firm, if you had a contact that had a company that wanted you to be general counsel, if you were going to be of counsel or a foreign law consultant to some fragrance group that has international contacts and want you to consult on these things, make sure they're not giving you a job as a translator or anything frivolous. It has to be related to your legal studies.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? It can be any employer as long as they're employing you in a capacity that.
Yeah, but if you have 5 people in a business and everybody's working in their pajamas remotely during the pandemic, you can't be the one person in, as a lawyer. It's got to make sense.
Right. Perfect. So you mentioned very briefly the prevailing wage. And so as soon as asking if you can be a little bit more specific, is there a minimum salary to be sponsored?
Yes.
What-
There are wages online, and you have to look. There are different scales or levels of what that wage is, but generally on a moment's notice, our office puts somebody on hold, we go onto the system and we look right away. So the minimum wage for a full-time attorney in the New York City area is something that's governed by the Labor Department. And you do this little waltz. It's brief, but it's a waltz where the American petitioner will have to post. And now when people are working remotely, they literally have to post it in their homes. They have to post that there's a job available in case an American may see it. So you spend about 10 days, 2 weeks with the Labor Department before you can pivot to the immigration authorities. The Labor Department wants to make sure you're being paid a prevailing wage and protects you. Immigration wants to be make sure that your job is really a specialty occupation. It's like a double-edged sword. It's weird. The Immigration Service, on the one hand, cracks down to make sure that these jobs are, that their job is to protect Americans to get jobs. On the other hand, they want to make sure that there's no taking advantage of foreign workers in America. So a lot of these rules look funny, but they're there to protect all these different policy considerations.
Yeah, and if a student is really curious, you can look up the prevailing wage
Yeah.
on the Department of Labor's website.
I don't think you should Google it, but again, you can call our office or email me, and I'll put my email in the chat.
Perfect. So there's a couple of people asking about working for international organizations or intergovernmental organizations like the World Bank or the UN. Do they need to apply for H1, or are there other categories? Can you talk about
Yes, there are other categories. First of all, you might get a job working for your embassy, for your consulate. You might get something with an international organization or the UN that has its own category of visas. Also, think about this. You might want to teach. That's a CAP exempt job. When I do Yeshiva University's immigration work, in addition to teaching, and they have an adjunct professor, that adjunct can do an H1B. They're CAP exempt any time of the day. So you can actually look to find imaginative ways and other alternatives of getting visas other than a conventional H1. My advice is, since we're doing this lecture now, January 31st of the year, try to conventionally get somebody to sponsor you, get a consultation with a capable lawyer, and then if the H1 doesn't work out, at least you've consulted with a lawyer and you're working on your backup plan. The H1B should be plan A always. I just posted my email.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to go through now. Some of these are H1, but some are not. I have a green card question, which is if a student has a sibling who has citizenship, are they able to apply for a green card with that?
So be careful first, because remember, you're an F1. I rattled it off fast, but one of the things of being a student is that you have an unrelinquished domicile you're going to go home to. All of a sudden, a brother or a sister or a sibling sponsors you. When you're traveling in and out, if immigration figures out that you showed in dual intent to go to school and to be here on a green card application, they may not readmit you. So be careful. Also, sibling cases take 15 years to get done generally. John Belushi in an old movie, it's an old movie, but it was a fresh movie when I was a kid, said 7 years of college down the drain. You don't want to be here. You're not going to have enough runway for 15 years to wait for the sibling case to work. So a sibling who's a citizen, you might be smart to put the case in, but please depend on your own academics, your own professional onboarding into the workforce. And if you get that H1, you start an employer visa, and you have your sibling thing cut in the back, then you're protected, because the H1 allows you to have a dual intent in the statute. The employment green card may happen sooner than a sibling, and the sibling case is really an insurance in case you lose the green card or the employer fires you close to the end of the green card case. So I like having a belt and suspenders. I look for all kinds of options, and believe it or not, I get multiple actions with married couples, because the spouse may have something where I can do something for them, and then the law student, the LLM, can get a dependent visa that gives them a generic authority to do everything. The H1B only allows you to work for one employer, but if your spouse gets an E visa or some other visa that allows a dependency, you might luck out and get a general one. So generally, when I have couples, there's a lot more content, and it's more exciting for us to find options.
Great. At the end of OPT, is it possible to fall back, quotes, on a B1, B2?
Yes.
And if yes, do they need to re-enter the country from another country? Or
No, you can change your status so long as you apply during that 60-day grace period for a B1, B2. But you need to have a good narrative. The old days, we used to Xerox traveler's checks to say, look how much money I have for the duration of my trip. Now we take credit cards and we show a trip that you may want to take, or what you want to do because you were busy going to school. But if you say you're going to Disney World and Disney World's closed because of the pandemic, don't say that. If you say you're going to attend a wedding attend the wedding and show a copy of the invitation. Sometimes you also want to be careful about your admonitions. There are other visas out there, everybody. There are religious worker visas for people who are religious. So you really don't want to say so many different representations. They're a student, they want to become a visitor, then they're going to do this. You want to pace yourself and protect yourself. Sometimes we have people leave, apply for statuses, and then they sort it out at American embassies abroad. But a lot of the embassies are now pacing themselves. They're not so user-friendly. So the advice we dispense really is country specific based on the narrative of how you got to where you are now.
Great. On OPT, is it possible to work as an independent contractor, 1099?
So it's a lot of people do this. They get their own, you're allowed to work for anybody so long as you have the OPT card. So if you're an actor and you're working in a restaurant, you can make the argument that you're studying human relationships, how a woman speaks to her husband, how a husband speaks to his mother-in-law, and all of these different things, because you're developing your performing skills. The same goes in our space. Anything related to the legal arena, you could be working in any capacity related to the law during OPT. But be very careful that you don't put yourself in something that you think is related to law, but it isn't. Law is generic, but if you took a concentration in a particular field, and then you're here as an LLM and you're studying and you're working in something completely different, you need to explain that. You might need to explain this at a later time to the authorities. So take a consultation with somebody. If you came for an LLM, as my father did at NYU in tax, and then you're working in a family law group, will they give you a hard time? No. Now, there are tax consequences to couples that are getting divorced. So there is an argument that you're trying to get into an arena that intersects beautifully with what you studied in America. Just make sure that you have developed a good narrative. Not that they're going to test you now, but it may come to play during your green card or another time.
Yep. Yeah, that's great advice. And I think students just make sure it's related to your area of study. My understanding is the work does not need to be full-time for OPT. And it also does not need to be paid, but it does need to be very clearly related to your area of study. I would also say for OPT, do always be sure you talk to your law school's visa office, because they're the experts for your program in your school, and they're going to be able to give you the best information. I have an H1B question. After 6 years, once you've done all 6 years on the H1B, can I apply for an extension while still in the US? Do I have to go back to my home country? What happens next?
So after 6 years, first of all, you're allowed to use every day, week, month that you missed on vacation. You went back home to India for Christmas. Count those days, keep those boarding passes, keep proof, because we can recapture every day, every week, every month. I want you to know we've had tragic cases where people in year 5 were fired and their green card was in jeopardy, but they kept copious notes of their visits in and out. Sometimes we send people out of America so they can recapture time as they're winding down on their H1B. But if you're in status, you have a 60-day grace period at the completion of work to then pivot to a change of status if you want to, or go back to school. You can, on the side, have a green card filed, believe it or not, so long as we clip your wings. What does that mean? You know, if you're a student in school and you want to apply for a green card, you'll do it, you'll get away with it. But if you're traveling, an American consular official may catch that you applied for a green card, where you're not allowed to have a dual intent as a student. So really, the person who's winding down on their H1B has to have a plan and should be thinking about a green card by the 4th year of your H1. You need to lodge it before the 5th year so that you can extend yourself under that AC-21, that provision of law that allows you to extend the H1 a year at a time. So you don't want to be running at a runway unless you're happy to go home.
Great. On an F1 visa, if they've applied for OPT in March, April, and they have a job secured in the United States, can they leave the country in the summer?
I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it these days with pandemics. Nothing is assured. Another variant can come back faster than you figure it out. And you're kind of in a weird state. There's something called cap gap. I didn't want to put everybody to sleep, but there is, if you look at your OPT card, for those of you that have it, there may be a gap between the time that your OPT expires and when you can start working on the H1. The H1s will not be activated until October 1. The fiscal year for the government's October. You can apply 6 months in advance for a visa. So now if you're running out of runway and you get selected, but you don't know whether or not your case has gotten approved, the government may not let you back in. You also have that dual intent issue. You're a student, you're supposed to go back, now you're working. You don't want to start explaining things to an American consul who's in a bad mood. I don't think vacations should be taken in days of pandemic. And when you're here and you're trying to build a home, a professional runway in America, this is a very delicate time.
Yeah, that's great. I would also say talk to your school's career visa advisors about this. I would say NYU's agrees with Michael. It's risky but they can also provide advice on that question.
Yeah, and if there's an emergency, these days I have people, believe it or not, attending shivas, funerals, bar mitzvahs, weddings, all kinds of things, all by FaceTime. I hate to say it, the whole world has changed its conduct. And we are, again, a few years away from another contentious election where rules are going to start changing. And we have to make sure that we kind of adapt. And I hate to say this, there's a different way that people are treated in Europe than they are in Asia. And there's also different protocols as far as the host nations and how they're treating COVID. So, again, you have a lot of moving parts. Vacations ought to be put on the back burner.
Great. I think I'll take this question as if somebody gets an LLM and pursues OPT and then pursues a JD, do they get a second OPT? And I'm going to answer that because I have a lot of experience with that at NYU. It depends on the law school. So that as you're applying to JD programs is actually something you should ask very clearly to the law school that you're applying to. It is not an option at NYU. If you've used OPT after your LLM, NYU considers a Master's of Law higher level degree, and we would not be supporting OPT a second time. But other schools have different policies there. And so it's actually a really important question, but you should talk to your law school where you're applying. It seems there was a second, Michael, this is back to you, a second lottery in 2020 and 2021 for the H1Bs. How does this work? And I think you already talked about this a little, fewer people applied or people's plans changed because of the pandemic. I don't know if you have a crystal ball, but do you think that's going to be happening again?
So interesting. There's no crystal ball. You just have to assume, and this is one of the brilliant experiences when you kind of grow up in a household with a dean like my dad. His theory was always file, file, file. Don't care about the noise. All the people filed before you, half of them may lose their job, half of them may want to go home, half of them may get COVID. I mean, you don't wish that on anybody. But a lot of the employers along the way change their minds. Sorry, we don't want to do this anymore, and they withdraw the case. Or the government does not believe that the person who applied is qualified for a specialty occupation, or they're working in a coffee shop as a lawyer. So, again, you want to apply because there's always a new group. And this last year, they've done 3 cycles of giving out. Can you imagine what a blessing it is? We told our client we haven't heard anything in the first or second cycle, and then all of a sudden, boom, we get an email. Your client has been selected to go for the H1B cap. They didn't run out of them, which is a great sign, everybody. And it's a sign of a slowing economy, but it's also a sign of an opportunity.
Great. We sort of touched on this already, but can lawyers pursue a policy role for an H1B? So not practicing as a lawyer, but working in a think tank or some other policy organization?
Yes. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I'm a mayor in New Jersey where I live. I understand the political process. People who are engaged in think tanks and advocacy and committees for legislation, whether it's we've done H1Bs for the district attorney's offices to bring people in that are supporting investigations. Members of Congress that are, having to respond to legislation or support certain legislation will need lawyers who are familiar with law, or foreign law consultants or law clerks. And that's where we get into the details and we strut our stuff when we make the applications. Now you have to be prepared for somebody to say, well, you're not really acting as a lawyer. It doesn't have to be something conventional where you're making pleadings, you're litigating, or you're defending. The other thing to consider, believe it or not, is teaching. You can do part-time H1. Now, the other part of your life is not authorized. So you can't be a part-time teacher in a school teaching law. Why can't you be sponsored as an H1B teaching law in a high school, in a college, in a university, or a law school? But you might have to figure out what you're going to do, because you don't get paid a lot as a teacher and it doesn't fill up a lot of your time. But if it gives you the right to be here and your spouse is allowed to have a dependent visa, your spouse may have an opportunity. And I want you to know, we go to battle with a sword and a shield. So one member of the family may have the H, the other one comes in with the green card. Or, or we get 2 green cards and 1 H, keeping a couple suspended. So there's all kinds of imaginative options that we develop with couples.
Great. Can a US-based employer, but whose work is remote, especially an employee who may be working outside of the United States, be a visa sponsor?
You don't need a visa if you're working outside of America. So it's a waste. And like I said, you can recapture that day, week, and month that you're sitting on a Zoom outside of the country because you weren't in the territorial waters of the United States. So the answer to your question is you want to apply for an H1, but you'll be able to recapture all the time. If you're still working for the company outside, it's to your advantage if that's what you want.
Great. A couple questions about what's expected of the employer. So first, and I'll try to combine these, if the student is the one paying the attorney fees, how much does the employer have to expend? And what exactly does sponsorship mean in terms of financial sponsorship for the student?
So a few things, and you'll repeat that last portion in case I don't address it. It doesn't matter who pays you for the ethical propriety of an immigration lawyer to step in. Understand, there are 2 players. We have potential conflicts in every case in the U.S. immigration space. A husband and a wife, or a husband, or a wife and a wife are applying for a green card. Everything's great until the dishes start flying. Who do you represent? The one who threw the dish or the one it was thrown at? In the employer version, it's the same experience. An immigration lawyer represents both the petitioner, the law firm or the company offering you a job, and you as a beneficiary. So the lawyer has to act properly for all parties. And that is very important governing principle for you to understand, that it doesn't really matter who pays. The law governs who pays. The filing fees, I believe, need to be paid by the employer. The legal fee could be paid by the individual, but you're in a much better position if the employer does the whole thing. There's a audit team that can come by on H1s, that can knock on your door as an employer and want to see, where is this person sitting? They come with cameras and a badge and they say, show us the projects they're working on. Show us who paid the legal fee for the H1. Show us who paid the filing fee. It's just a lot better if the employer acts on your behalf, although the legal fee could be paid by the individual. In the Labor Department arena, when it comes to green cards, you have to understand, anything to do with the labor, by law, the employer must pay, as another way of dissuading an employer from trying to help a foreigner. When it comes to adjusting of status and the immigration components of a green card, the individual can pay for that. So the fact that you might be audited lends it, for me, to make sure that it's an employer prompted effort. That's the best way to put this initiative.
Okay, I think that answered both of the questions.
Thank you.
How soon after getting an H1B can you begin to consider green card sponsorship by the same employer?
On a Monday, you apply for an H1, you're not waiting for the thing to get approved, because if you're a lawyer and you have a pulse, you get an H1. On Tuesday, you start having conversations on green cards. If you're a prospective client in our office, we've already pitched both to you. I have two different teams working at the same time. If the law firm is willing to sponsor you, that's the best way to do it. What if you don't get selected for the H1? You've wasted intermittent time. You might as well get underway with the green card. Also, let's be imaginative here. You're bouncing two balls at the same time, right? So the two players don't have to be the same. You can have an H1 where you are now. That governs your right to be in America. You can have a green card lodged by a third party, so long as they're not related to you. Now, they could be related to you, but then you're going to have to toggle off on the application that there's a familial relationship, and the case will be audited and slowed down. But again, the minute you have an H1, you're allowed to have a dual intent and you're allowed to apply for a green card. Since these things take time, you might want to do it. Our experience has been that law firms will not sponsor you for a green card so quickly if they're going to do the H. It's just common sense. The minute you get a green card, you're a free agent to leave. Unless you're a rock star and you negotiate in the beginning, okay, I want an H1, I want a green card, and I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, did you want that on white toast? If you have that kind of relationship, good. But first, you got to convince them to like you. Then you got to convince them to go through this craziness with the H1. The green card is kind of like a back burner thing, but it shouldn't be a back burner when you've delighted them with your talents and they really want you. I did it in my office. I've had H1s that I've sponsored in my office at great risk that I may not, that they may leave, but they can only use the H1 for me. They can exercise the portability clause and go to another employer if they want to. But for the H1, they have to work for me. Now I start having conversation with my partners. Do I really want to do an H1 to a green card for this person? Okay, I can, 2.5 years is going to take for us to get the green card. I have them for 2.5 years. Now we got the green card. What do? They're a free agent. So you know what you do? You pay them handsomely. You buy them coffee and you hope and pray they stay with you until they become citizens, and then their children start working for you at a later generation. You have to figure out, and you want to understand the culture of the firm when it comes to how they treat you on immigration. I remember a young lady in our office that we sponsored for an H1. She didn't leave us. We applied for the green card. She stayed with us for many, many years. I was happy when she left because it was good for her career to go where she went, but I was only too happy to sponsor her. It was a partnership in many ways of love. And that's the kind of environment you want to be in.
Absolutely. So we have only 1 minute left and there are a bunch of questions. So attendees, I'm very sorry if we don't get to your question. I think many of the questions on here actually could be answered by your school's immigration advisors if they're OPT related. And also you can also reach out to us and we can try to set up other times if you have a more individualized question to talk about.
My father, by the way, joins us. Not too bad after all these years, thank God.
Yes, that's so, I'm so glad he's here. It's just so wonderful. So I think I'm going to throw in just this last question. And again, I'm very sorry to you students if we didn't get to your question. We will share the video of this session with the school coordinator at your schools, probably by next week. And with that, I will also share the PowerPoint and the documents that Michael mentioned as well. So you can watch this again and have access to all of those materials. And so the last question you mentioned really quickly in your overview, the investment-based green card, the EB-5 or EB, I forget what number it is, but anyway, the investment-based visa. So can you tell us a little bit more about that as with that, how that process works and can it lead to citizenship?
Yes. So anything can lead to citizenship. It could be a sibling case. It could be an employment-based case. The golden grail is US citizenship, getting a visa, getting a green card. Once you have a green card, you have to wait 5 years for citizenship or 3 years if you're married to an American citizen. The EB-5 right now is lapsed. It's on hold. But before it took a little bit of a heart attack. The 3 ways of getting it was, the first way is you put 900 grand you put $1.8 million in your own business and employ 10 people to work. It's a lot of money. That amount used to be $1 million. It went up to 1.8. The next one is you put 900 grand and 10 people to work in a rural area where unemployment is very high. The third one is you invest in one of 875 regional centers where the government will then see that employment will spin off 10 jobs. So the regional center that we love was the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, where the New York Nets play. 10 guys selling popcorn and a person in Guyana gets a green card. 10 guys selling beer and a gentle lady in Germany gets a green card. All of these lapsed. The only thing that reverted back when the law lapsed was you can put $500,000 now into your own specific business where you have 10 people to work. You buy a Dunkin' Donuts or you do something. Not related to the law. You can start your own law firm, but you need to have revenue and you need to have 10 new people, and it's a real job. But that is a green card application. It does not give you any intermittent right to be here. Also, like a marriage to an American citizen, the green card you get is conditional nature. They have a look back. If a couple's married less than 2 years, or you do one of these EB-5s, they want another look back. 90 days before the 2-year anniversary of the green card, you have to petition to remove the conditions to the green card because they don't trust marriages and they don't trust these EB-5 regional centers. And I can tell you, a lot of them go into the toilet. A lot of them end up having all kinds of fraud. I think there are only 20 or 30 that historically we've used. Knock on wood, we haven't lost any EB-5s. We had one arms dealer who asked for his money back, so I don't consider that to be a loss. And you have to be careful because you can lose your money and not get a green card if you embark in such a industrious experience. I just also want to end, Clara, go to our website, which is wildslaw.com. I had the privilege a few days ago, Fox News took me down to Ellis Island to walk people through what immigration was. And it's a beautiful 20-minute kind of conversation. All of you watching this are embarking on a tremendous tradition. This country is great because of foreign nationals, because of entrepreneurs. Don't lose sight because of these challenges. You will find a home. Eventually, you'll get a green card and citizenship, and then you will petition your relatives and other people in your lives, and you will become employers and employ other people in what our founding documents and parents envisioned to be a beautiful experiment. So roll up your sleeves, find the right people, ask the right questions, and Godspeed to all of you.
Thank you so much. That is a beautiful place to end. Thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge, answering all of the questions that came in. I hope this was helpful to students. Again, contact your school for the recording and the documents when they're ready early next week. Michael, thank you for spending Monday evening with us. I hope you have a wonderful night, and I look forward to seeing you again next year, if not sooner.
Thank you. I'll send you the PowerPoint so people can get it.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Ciao.